was Mother's Day. The restaurant was in Columbus, Ohio, the kind that was mid-range upscale. Not too flashy, but nice enough that people dressed up to come in. The warm yellow light cast a glow on the white tablecloths. The soft clinking of glasses, the sound of silverware being set on plates. All around us were families having dinner, their conversations just quiet enough to create a warm atmosphere. We were seated at a table near the window. Linda sat to my left. She was wearing a light blue dress she'd had for a few years, carefully ironed that morning. I knew she had spent a long time getting ready for that evening. She was always like that. Even though she was tired, even though her hands trembled, she always wanted to look neat and tidy when she saw her son. Jason sat across from his mother. Next to him was Emily, his wife, with her hair neatly combed, small earrings sparkling under the light, and the straight-backed posture of someone who was used to walking into places like this without having to look at the prices on the menu. They had already ordered before I even finished the first page of the menu. Steak, seafood, a bottle of red wine. Linda only ordered soup. I ordered the cheapest salad on the menu, not because I wanted it, but because I already knew where this evening was headed. When the waiter returned with the black bill folder in his hand, Emily leaned forward slightly, as if she were just arranging some minor detail. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear enough for everyone at the table to hear. "We'll split it," she said. Then she glanced briefly at Linda. "We're not paying for her." A brief silence fell over our table. Jason didn't look up right away. He just gave a slight nod, as if it were a detail that had already been agreed upon, with no need for further discussion. Linda froze. Her hands, resting on the edge of the table, clasped together tightly. She didn't ask them to repeat it. She didn't try to laugh it off. She didn't defend her son the way she usually did. She just sat there, silent. I looked at my wife, then over at my son, and in that moment I didn't feel anger. I just realized that the son I had raised for the past 45 years was no longer the person I once knew. We live in a quiet suburb just outside of Columbus, Ohio. It's not a bad place, but it's not special either. Rows of identical houses, neatly mowed front lawns, and cars parked silently in the driveways every evening. Linda and I have lived in our house for nearly 30 years. Almost nothing inside has changed. The old wooden dining set, the refrigerator that makes a soft humming sound when it runs too long, and the kitchen table where we sit every morning, which always has a stack of papers in the right-hand corner. The electric bill, the water bill, payment reminders. I usually stack them in order, as if organizing them would somehow make them easier to deal with. We live on my pension. It's not much, but it used to be enough, until the medical expenses started to rise. At first, it was just a few prescriptions each month. Then came more tests, then more follow-up appointments that the doctor said were necessary. Each one was a small amount, but together they added up to a number I no longer wanted to look at for too long. Linda never complained about it. She just changed the way she took her medicine. On the kitchen table, next to a glass of water, there was always a small plastic pill organizer, divided into days of the week. But I knew she wasn't taking them as prescribed. A single pill would be split in half. Sometimes she'd make it last an extra day. Sometimes she'd skip a dose she said wasn't necessary. She always told me she was fine. I don't argue with her about it anymore. There are some things we both understand, but neither of us wants to say out loud. In the mornings, I usually wake up earlier than Linda. I sit alone at the kitchen table, staring at the bills, trying to figure out which one to pay first this month. Sometimes I have to choose between the electricity bill and her medicine. Neither choice is easy. Our car is an old grey sedan. Every time we go out, I have to turn the key at least twice. Some days, 3 times. The engine starts slow and heavy, as if it's struggling right along with us. But it still runs. And as long as it runs, I don't think about replacing it. Our life doesn't have any major incidents. Nothing big enough for other people to notice. But hardship doesn't always arrive with a loud noise. It comes in small things, an unpaid bill, a pill split in half, a morning spent thinking too long before deciding what to spend money on. It doesn't break your life all at once. It's there every day, and little by little, it wears a person down. Things weren't always like this. There was a time when Linda and I didn't have to think so long about every bill. Not rich, but stable. We had a plan, a belief that if you worked hard and lived carefully, things would follow a predictable path. Jason was different back then too. He wasn't the type to cause trouble. He went to work regularly, was responsible, and always said he wanted to build something of his own. I still remember the evening he sat at the kitchen table, right where I sit every morning now. He told me he wanted to open a small construction company. Not big projects, just taking on modest jobs, one step at a time. He didn't speak loudly. He wasn't trying to convince me. He just laid out his plan very clearly. I believed him. Not because he was my son, but because I saw the seriousness in the way he thought. Linda and I talked about it for days. We didn't have a lot of money. Most of it was savings for our old age. The kind you hope you won't have to use too soon. There was also the old house in the suburbs where my parents used to live. We had kept it as a piece of our family's memory. In the end, we decided to sell that house. I withdrew all the savings we had built up for over 20 years. We gave it all to Jason. We didn't keep any in reserve. We didn't split it. It was everything. Linda asked me once, before we transferred the money, what if we need it later? I told her it would be fine, that Jason wouldn't let that happen. That night, when we gave him the money, Jason hugged Linda for a long time. He said he would do everything right, that once the business was stable, he would take care of us, that he wouldn't forget what we had done. I didn't ask him to pay the money back. I just needed him to remember. In the first few years, he was true to his word. He called often. Sometimes just to ask if his mother had eaten. Sometimes just to tell us how his workday went. Occasionally, he would come home on the weekend. He'd bring food. He'd sit and talk for longer than a normal dinner. Every time he did, Linda would smile more, and I would think I had done the right thing. Then Jason's business started doing better. He got more projects. His income improved. He moved out on his own, bought a new car. Then he married Emily. Everything changed after that. It wasn't a big change that everyone noticed right away. Just little details. The calls became less frequent. The visits home became shorter. The caring questions started to feel more rushed. There wasn't one specific moment where you could say, this is where it all went wrong. It was just little by little. Small things you don't notice right when they happen, until one day you look back and you don't recognize the person in front of you anymore. People don't change overnight. They change, piece by piece, until you don't recognize them anymore. After marrying Emily, Jason's life started to change more noticeably. At first, I thought it was normal. Everyone starts their own family, has their own responsibilities, has different priorities. But the change didn't just stop at him being busier. It went deeper into how Jason was present in our lives. The calls started to become less frequent. Before, Jason might call just to ask if his mother had eaten. Now, every time the phone rang, I already knew the conversation would be short. "I'm busy, just calling to check in. Work has been really busy lately. I probably can't come over this weekend." There was nothing wrong with what he said. But it wasn't the same as before. His visits home also became shorter. He used to stay for the whole afternoon, sometimes even until after dinner. Now, he'd stop by for about an hour, sometimes less. One day, he just stood at the door, said a few words, and left. Emily always came with him. She was never impolite. She always greeted us, always smiled at the right moments. But in the way she looked around the house, in the way she sat down on the couch, there was always a very clear distance. Not a physical distance, but an emotional one. Linda, on the other hand, always tried to keep things light. She'd ask about their day, prepare food, and try to prolong the conversation with simple questions. She never mentioned that Jason was coming home less, never asked why he didn't call as often as before. If I ever said anything, Linda would always defend him. "He's probably just really busy. Everyone's like that these days. As long as he's okay, that's all that matters." I knew Linda wasn't wrong. But I also knew she was choosing to believe the more comfortable truth. As for me, I started to see other things. The little details I had overlooked before, the way Jason would look at his phone while talking to us, the way he'd answer questions quickly, just to get them over with. The way he no longer asked any follow-up questions after we talked about Linda's health. There was never a single argument. There were no harsh words. On the surface, everything seemed normal. But that's what made it so uncomfortable. Because there was no clear moment to start talking about it, just a lingering feeling that we were slowly drifting away from our son, even when he was sitting right in front of us. I was starting to realize it, but I hadn't accepted it, because accepting meant admitting that what I'd believed before might have been wrong, and there are some things you just don't want to face too soon. A family doesn't always disappear in an obvious way. Sometimes it just fades, so slowly you don't even notice, until you look back and see the space has been there all along. It happened on a weekend afternoon, one that seemed unremarkable from the outside. The air was a little colder than usual. The light in the backyard was starting to turn a pale grey, and Linda had told me that morning she wasn't feeling well, but she kept on doing things around the house, as always, as if just keeping everything normal would make her body follow suit. I was in the garage, bent over checking the old car, the one that took a little longer to start each time, when I heard a small sound from the kitchen. It wasn't a crash, not a loud thud, just the kind of sound that makes you stop, like when something loses its balance. When I walked in, Linda was already on the floor, her back against the cabinets, her hands resting lightly on her knees. Her face was pale in a way I had grown used to, but could never truly get used to. I didn't need to ask. I knew immediately what was happening. Her blood sugar had dropped again. I helped her up and got her into a chair, my hand steadying her wrist so she wouldn't shake too much while holding the glass of water. Then I quickly grabbed a bit of cake left in the fridge, the kind we always kept on hand for moments like this, like a way of preparing for something we knew would happen sooner or later. This wasn't the first time, but every time it happened, I felt time slows down. Not in a pleasant way, but in the way that makes you realize you're no longer in control of things. I picked up my phone and called Jason. It rang once, twice. No one picked up. I called again. keeping the phone to my ear longer than usual, as if a little more patience could change the outcome. But nothing changed. I looked at Linda. She'd managed a few sips of water, and her breathing was a little more stable, but she wasn't quite back to normal yet. I didn't call a third time. I put the phone down on the table, right next to the medicine box she had just used. About 15 minutes later, the phone buzzed. A text from Jason. "I'm busy. Is everything okay?" Just one sentence. No sign of urgency and no sign of worry. Just a question sent out of reflex. I read it once. Then I read it again. Not because I didn't understand, but because I was waiting for something else to follow. But there was nothing. No call back. No second question. Nothing more. I turned to look at Linda. She had leaned back in her chair, her eyes closed for a few seconds, as if she were gathering her strength bit by bit. When I said that I had called Jason, she opened her eyes, looked at me, and then gave a very slight nod. "He must be really busy," she said, her voice even and calm, as if that explanation was enough to end the conversation. I didn't answer right away. I looked at her for a moment longer, then down at the phone in my hand. I understood why she said that. It wasn't naivety, it was a choice. The choice to believe in the thing that would hurt her less. But there are some things that, once you've seen them, you can't go back to seeing the old way. It wasn't because Jason didn't have time. Everyone gets busy sometimes. I've been there myself. But being busy and no longer being a priority are two different things, and that difference isn't about time, but about how someone responds when you need them. I picked up my phone, looked at that message one more time, and then set it down more slowly than before. And for the first time, I didn't try to find another reason to explain it away. Not busy. Just not a priority anymore. That feeling doesn't hit you like a heavy blow. It doesn't knock you down right away. It's just there, quietly growing heavier over time, until you realize that what you're losing isn't just a moment of attention, but your place in someone else's life. The waiter returned to the table with a professional smile, a small notepad in hand, standing close enough to hear clearly, but far enough not to intrude. Emily was the first to order. She didn't need to think for long. Didn't look too closely at the menu. Just glanced over a few lines and chose decisively, as if those choices were already familiar to her. A medium-rare steak with a seafood add-on and a bottle of red wine whose name she pronounced fluently, without a second glance. Her voice was even natural, without a trace of hesitation, as if ordering those things was just a normal part of any evening. Jason gave a slight nod when Emily finished ordering, his eyes still glued to his phone screen. His fingers swiped back and forth across the screen, pausing for a few seconds, then continuing on as if something more important was happening somewhere else. Not at this dinner table. When the waiter turned to Linda, she held the menu a little longer. It wasn't because she didn't know what to choose. It was because she was looking at the price column. In the end, she just ordered a bowl of soup. Her voice was a little quieter than usual, but still clear enough. I knew she wasn't hungry, or if she was, she wouldn't eat much anyway. Lately, she'd been eating less, not because she wanted to, but because her body just didn't respond the way it used to. I ordered something simple, not because I didn't want to eat something else, but because I was used to calculating everything before making even the smallest decision that involved money. When the waiter left, the table returned to its initial silence. But this time, that silence was no longer comfortable. Jason was still looking at his phone. He would occasionally nod slightly, as if responding to something we didn't know about. Emily sat up straight, her eyes scanning the restaurant, sometimes adjusting her sleeve, sometimes taking a sip of water, as if she were waiting for the evening to unfold exactly as she expected. Linda sat next to me, her hands resting lightly on the table. Occasionally her eyes would drift over to Jason, then look away, as if she was searching for the right moment to start a conversation, but didn't know where to begin. I didn't say much. I just watched. Every little detail. The way Jason didn't look up when Linda asked a simple question. The way Emily answered for him, quick and concise, before changing the subject. The way Linda nodded, as if everything was fine, even though it clearly wasn't. The food was brought out then. Emily's plate was full, beautifully presented, the meat still hot and fragrant. Jason's was the same. As for Linda, a small bowl of soup was placed in front of her, a light steam rising from it, but she just picked up her spoon, stirred it slowly once, and put it back down. She ate very little. No one asked why, no one noticed. Or maybe they did notice, but not enough to stop. I looked at my wife, then at my son. There are some things that no one needs to say out loud. You just have to watch long enough, and you'll understand. I had already understood long before this. Not in this moment, not at this meal, but for a very long time, through every little detail I had chosen to ignore. I sat there, listening to the clink of silverware on plates, the chatter from surrounding tables, and felt the distance that existed right in front of me with perfect clarity. I was prepared for this moment. Not to start a fight, not to prove anything, but simply to protect something that I knew if I didn't, no one else would do it for me. A simple thing, but important enough that I could no longer just sit by as I had before. When the waiter returned with the bill folder in hand, the atmosphere at the table still appeared normal from the outside. Everything was proceeding in the usual sequence of a dinner. The meal was nearly finished, the glasses were half empty, and the scattered conversations were winding down. He placed the folder in the middle of the table, instinctively angling it a little toward Jason, as if he was the one who would be handling that part. No one rushed to touch it. There was a brief pause, not long enough for an outsider to notice, but long enough for those of us at the table to feel it. Emily was the one who broke that pause. She leaned forward slightly, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the table, her gaze directed at the waiter with the confidence of someone used to making decisions in situations like this. Her voice wasn't loud. There was no tension. There was no sign that she was about to say something that could hurt someone. "We'll split it," she said, as if it were just a simple choice between two payment methods. Then she subtly glanced over at Linda, just a very slight flick of her eyes, almost unnoticeable if you weren't looking closely. "We're not paying for her." The sentence was uttered with such calmness that made you stop and process what you'd just heard. There was no emphasis, no obvious malice in her voice. It was just an announcement, a decision that had already been accepted. Jason didn't react immediately. He kept his eyes on his phone for another second before setting it down, as if it were more important than what had just been said. He didn't look at his mother. He didn't look at me. He just gave a very slight nod. A nod so small that if you weren't paying attention, you might have missed it. But I saw it, and that was enough. No one else at the table said anything. The waiter stood still for a moment, his gaze shifting from Emily to Jason, and then to me, as if waiting for some final confirmation. But no one spoke up. Linda sat still. Her hands were on her lap, her fingers clenching slightly. Not hard, just enough to keep them from trembling anymore. She didn't question it. She didn't object. She didn't try to turn it into a joke. She just lowered her head very slightly, as if accepting something she had long understood, but had always hoped would never happen so explicitly. I looked at my wife, then at my son. In that moment, I realized what bothered me wasn't what Emily had said, it was the way she said it. Too easily, too casually, as if not paying for her husband's mother wasn't something to consider, wasn't something that could cause pain, but was simply a logical choice on an ordinary evening. No one raised their voice. There was no argument. There were no signs of an open conflict. And that was precisely what made everything feel heavier. Because when thoughtlessness is expressed so naturally, it's no longer a momentary act. It becomes a part of who they are, a part that you can't change with just a simple reminder. I sat there, saying nothing, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I understood that once certain things are said in that way, any explanation that follows becomes unnecessary. I didn't react right after the words were spoken. I remained still for a few seconds, long enough for things to settle, long enough for me to be sure that what I was about to do wasn't an impulsive reaction, but a considered choice. I looked at the waiter, then down at the bill folder in the middle of the table. Then I stood up, not too quickly, without making a loud noise, just a simple movement, enough for those around me to realize something was changing. Jason looked up. Emily also turned to look at me, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes, as if she were wondering why I was interrupting something she considered settled. I didn't look at them right away. I turned to the waiter first. My voice was calm and clear. It's already taken care of. The waiter paused for a second, then gave a slight nod, as if he understood. There were no further questions. No great surprise. Just a confirmation that everything had been handled. I returned to the table. This time, Jason looked at me for a little longer. Emily didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes was different. The confidence from before was gone. I didn't offer a lengthy explanation. There was no need to say when I had paid, how I did it, or why. None of that mattered. I looked directly at Jason. Then, I said, slowly, word by word, without raising my voice, without any extra emphasis, but clearly enough that no one could misunderstand. I didn't do this for you. I paused for a short beat, not for dramatic effect, but to make sure he was listening. I did it because she deserves better than this. I didn't look at Emily when I said that. I didn't need to. That sentence wasn't for her. It wasn't up for debate either. It was just a truth I had held inside for a very long time, and I chose the right moment to say it. No papers were presented. No secrets were exposed. There was no attempt to embarrass them in front of others. I wasn't standing there to win an argument. I was just standing there to hold on to something that I knew would disappear completely if I didn't. Linda's dignity. I turned to my wife. She was still sitting quietly, but her expression had changed. Not because of what I said, but because she understood why I'd said it. I held my hand out to her. Nothing more was said, and in that moment, I knew I didn't need to say anything else. No one spoke right away. The restaurant buzzed with the same sounds as before. The soft clinking of glasses, the chatter from other tables. But at our table, everything seemed separate from the rest of the room. Jason was still looking at me. But this time, the look in his eyes wasn't the same. The distraction was gone, as was the sense that everything happening around him was irrelevant. He put his phone down completely. Not just setting it aside, but with a slow movement, as if he needed both hands free to hold on to something he had just realized. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask any questions. He just looked. He looked long enough for me to know that for the first time that evening he was truly present. Emily sat up a little straighter. She was no longer looking around the restaurant. She wasn't adjusting her sleeve or sipping her water like before. Her gaze shifted between me and Jason, as if trying to understand what had just happened, and more importantly, what it meant for her position at this table. There was no strong reaction, no rebuttal, just a slight but clear imbalance. Linda was still sitting next to me. She didn't say anything, but I could feel her hand on mine, light, but enough for me to know she was there, and that she understood. The waiter came back again, this time just to clear some plates. He didn't ask anything else. Perhaps he was used to moments when outsiders shouldn't interfere. The air at the table grew heavier, not because anyone made it so, but because all the unsaid things were there, more present than any spoken word. Jason finally took a breath, as if he wanted to say something, but then he stopped. There are words that, when they come too late, you're no longer sure if saying them has any meaning. Emily turned away slightly, her eyes no longer holding their initial confidence. It wasn't because she was being criticized. It was because, for the first time, something in this room wasn't going the way she controlled it. No one got up and left immediately. There was no big scene, only the gazes that had changed, a silence that lasted longer than usual, and the very clear feeling that after tonight, things would never go back to how they were. Not because of one sentence, but because of everything that sentence had revealed. I stood up first, then offered my hand to Linda. Her hand in mine was lighter than I remembered, as if with the years, not just her strength, but also the way she held on to things had become more reserved. She stood up slowly, balancing with each step, and I just stood close by, saying nothing, just letting her know she didn't have to walk alone. We left the table. No one called out to us. There was no belated apology. Jason watched us go, his gaze lingering longer than before, as if for the first time he truly understood that some moments, once they pass, can never be fixed. But he didn't stand up, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't know where to begin. Emily was still sitting there, her back straight, but her eyes had lost their initial certainty, as if, for the first time, she realized that some things can't be controlled with casual conversation or quick decisions. The restaurant door opened. The air outside hit my face, a little colder but easier to breathe. It might be warm inside. It might be bright. But there are some places you can't stay another second without feeling like you're losing something. The parking lot was quiet. The yellow lights shone down on the pavement, stretching our shadows with each slow step. The old car was still there, as always, unchanged, non-judgmental, undemanding. I opened the door for Linda. She sat down, adjusted her dress, placed her hands on her lap, and looked straight ahead, not glancing back. I walked around to the driver's seat, got in, and closed the door. For a few seconds, we just sat there, saying nothing. It wasn't because there was nothing to say. It was because some things, if you have to say them out loud, mean they've truly happened. I put my hands on the steering wheel. My hands were steady, but I clearly felt something I'd never considered before. There are things in life that, when you lose them, you can earn back. There are things you can rebuild, if you have enough time. But there are also things that, once they're gone, there's no way to bring them back to how they were. I started the engine. The car started slowly, familiarly, like a repeating rhythm from the days that had passed. I looked straight ahead. I didn't look in the mirror. I didn't turn back. Wasn't because I didn't want to know what they were doing. It was because I understood that whatever they did after this wouldn't change what had already happened. I drove out of the parking lot. The streetlights followed one another, steady and even, leading down the road we had traveled thousands of times. Linda sat beside me, her breathing more even now. She rested her hand gently on the seat, and the space between us didn't need to be filled with words. She turned to look at me once. There were no questions in her eyes. No blame, just an understanding. And that, right now, was enough. I used to think that losing money was the worst thing a person could go through. That if you could hold on to your assets, hold on to what you'd saved, then at least you still had some part of your life under control. But over time, I realized that money was never the thing that held people together. What keeps a family going isn't what you give. It's how people remember it. It's how they look at you. It's how they treat you when there's no longer any reason they have to. And when that disappears, when the respect is no longer there, no amount of money can buy it back. No apology is soon enough. No amount of time is long enough. The car kept rolling forward. The road ahead looked the same as any other day. But this time, I knew that something in my life had changed forever, and the only thing I could do was hold on to what was still by my side, before it too became something I would have to learn to let go of. There was something I'd never thought about, not until everything unfolded so clearly right in front of my eyes. We spend our whole lives building something for our family, not just money, not just a roof over their heads, but the feeling that what you do will be preserved somewhere, in the way others see you, in the way they treat you, in the way they remember that you were once there for them. I used to believe that as long as I did enough, gave enough, sacrificed enough, then those things would naturally be understood, without needing to be reminded, without having to ask for it, without needing proof. But perhaps that's something many of us realize too late. That sacrifice doesn't automatically turn into respect. That affection can't hold its value on its own if there's no one to treasure it. And that in some relationships, if you don't stop to look back at the right moment, you'll just keep giving, until there's nothing left for yourself. I don't regret what I did for Jason. If I could go back, I would probably make the same decision, because that's the way I chose to be a father. But if there's one thing I understand better now, it's this: giving doesn't mean giving up on yourself, and loving someone doesn't mean you have to accept every way they treat you. There's a very thin line between sacrifice and losing yourself, and sometimes you only realize you've crossed that line when there's no way back. That night, as I drove home, I wasn't thinking about the money I'd lost. I wasn't thinking about the meal either. I was thinking about Linda, about how she still chose to believe in her son, even when everything had changed, about how she still held on to her gentleness, in a world that no longer treated her gently. And I understood that the only thing I needed to do from now on wasn't to fix what was broken in the past, but to protect what was still left. If you're watching this far, maybe you've been on one of two sides. Maybe you're the one who has given so much, and you're starting to feel like you're no longer seen. Or maybe you're the one who has been so busy with your own life that you haven't noticed someone waiting for a call, a question, or just a small sign that they still matter. No one changes in a single day, but no relationship is ever lost without signs beforehand. The question isn't what happened, it's when you choose to see it. And once you've seen it, what will you do next? If this story made you pause for a moment to think about someone in your life, then perhaps that's the most important thing. Not because this story is right, but because maybe, somewhere, it resembles a part of your own life. Thank you for staying until the end. And if you still have the chance to say something to someone you haven't checked in on for a long time, maybe today is a good day to start.